More Americans are serving time in Mexican prisons than in any other foreign country. Each year, millions cross the San Diego border seeking cheap fun in honky-tonk Tijuana. Many are arrested by an overworked police force trying to keep the peace. But for those charged with more than public drunkenness or rowdy behavior, a trip to Tijuana may end up at La Mesa prison. Americans are jailed there for everything from violent crimes to buying the wrong prescription drugs. They find that La Mesa is an underworld unto itself.
There's a desperation inside La Mesa prison.
Pastor David Walden is often the first friendly face an American prisoner sees. His group, aptly named Ministry on the Edge, visits Americans in the prison twice every week. Walden preaches to them and also delivers physical aid.
We gather all the different mail and food supplies and medical supplies and cash the checks of the inmates to pay their rent. We do all that before we arrive at the prison.
Once he's at La Mesa, Walden waits patiently.
I give instructions to everybody who goes in with me to walk humbly, to recognize that this is a different country. This is their football field and their football. Medication.
Walden's concern for the American prisoners comes from personal experience. He was arrested in California in the early 80s for securities fraud. Although the charges were eventually dropped, the experience changed him.
It was devastating to me and to my family, but I had to go through it, and I know at that time I didn't know why, but I know now why I went through it. And I share that with the inmates. And when I convey that to them, it brings them closer to me. We connect.
One of the Americans Walden connected to was David Bush, who came to La Mesa in 1997. The Wisconsin native was in San Diego on business and, like many Americans, crossed the border to buy cheap prescription drugs.
I could actually buy medication that I took myself or my family took and save a lot of money. It was just common sense.
Bush spent several $100s on a dozen medications. Most were common, over-the-counter drugs like Pepsid and cortisone cream. But he also bought small amounts of fen-phen and Valium.
I know now those two require a Mexican physician to prescribe the drug, just like in the United States.
When Bush left the pharmacy, he was greeted by a plainclothes officer who checked his purchases.
He asked me if I had prescriptions for these drugs. And I said, no, not here. I don't need them. And he said, hold the phone, we're going to go inside.
Bush's situation escalated from there. The federal police arrived.
He had automatic weapons, and suddenly I was being handcuffed, and I was thrown into the back of a vehicle, and they were laughing and jeering at me and pointing their guns at me. I just could not believe it. I still had the hope that they were going to take me to the station for a statement or something and let me go.
Instead, Bush was taken to a federal jail and locked in a dark cell, infested with bugs and without a toilet.
And I was there for 2 straight days. I didn't talk to anyone, couldn't communicate to anyone. I made one phone call to my wife and said, help, send the cavalry.
But no one came. Instead, Bush was charged with trafficking narcotics and sent to La Mesa. That's where he met David Walden.
Pastor Walden was truly my lifeline. He kept me alive, and he kept me encouraged, and he kept my family members encouraged.
I would say that David was probably in shock for the first couple of weeks. I mean, it was such a radical experience for him. It's like taking him and putting him on the moon.
Bush needed all the help he could get inside La Mesa, a virtual small city where everything is for sale. Prisoners even pay for a cell or room to sleep in.
It's like a real estate business inside that prison, because there's ownership of the places you live, and you can also rent. And I rented from a murderer whose name was Grande.
Bush paid $200 a month in rent, and inmates must pay for other essentials.
That's tonight's dinner.
What is it?
Beans.
There's a real problem in this particular prison. The lack of food, the lack of medical attention, the lack of housing, the lack of clothing. When you're brought into Mexico's prison, if you have no money or no resources, you'll find yourself sleeping outside.
And in Mexico, you're sort of like you're on your own, you're given the basics, you've got to buy a bed, you'll have to buy a hammock, you'll have to buy food, have someone to wash your clothes.
With Pastor Walden's help, American prisoners like David Bush can get checks from their families and friends cashed.
For the rent, one of the inmates there.
In La Mesa, prisoners can use that money to buy anything they want.
There are probably 16 to 20 little restaurants. If you've got the money, you can buy good steak. You can also buy lobster, shrimp. What do you want? There are toys. There are little shopping centers.
In this strange environment, Americans say they are special targets because they're considered rich.
Quite often Americans would be taken to telephones under threat of duress with knives or being punished and forced to call their loved ones back home and have money sent to them. And once the money was received in the jail, the prisoners or the trustees would take the money.
Bush says he and the other Americans found strength in numbers.
There were a couple of guys where we just did everything together and watched each other's back and made meals together. And
after 7 months at La Mesa, Bush won an appeal, and all charges were dropped, and he was free to go. Pastor Walden says Bush was lucky to have friends and family helping him mount his appeal.
He had to bring together medical records and doctors and all this report, and he had to have a team of people to do that so he could show that, hey, I am innocent of this. But it took a team to do that. That's not the case with most of the people who are in the prison in Mexico. They don't have that support system that David Bush had.
Even though he was released in 1998, Bush is still dealing with the repercussions of his arrest. This is his first time back near the border. He's here to get proof of his exoneration so that he can start to repair his life.
this piece of paper tells a story. It's a summation of what happened to me, that none of this should have happened and that my rights were violated and I should be freed immediately. That doesn't make up for the fact that the ruination took place before they reached that decision.
The U.S. State Department warns Americans going overseas that many countries have strict drug laws that carry harsh punishments. Some unfortunate travelers have also discovered that a handful of nations followed the judicial approach from Alice in Wonderland. Verdict first, trial later.